Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to show you how I painted this Italian M1340. This is the 28mm scale plastic kit from Warlord, which was a pretty good fun kit to put together, and if you would like to see the build video, there's a link for it in the description below. As you can probably see, I've painted this tank to represent one captured by Australians, because today is ANZAC Day. At least the day I'm making this video public is ANZAC Day. Obviously a lot of people are going to be watching it after ANZAC Day, it's still relevant any other day, just a little tiny bit more on ANZAC Day. There aren't really a lot of tanks you can paint specifically as Australian tanks, so I guess one captured by Australia is the next best thing. Okay, that might be enough waffling, time to paint. I start by priming the model, as is tradition. I've used black, probably Stynylrez Res here, I can't remember, but it doesn't really matter a whole lot. If you're painting, use whichever primer you like the most. I then airbrush on a base coat, and for this I'm using ammo by Mig Giallo Mimetico 3. I'm almost definitely saying that totally wrong. It's the sandy colour from the ammo by Mig Regio Esercito World War II Smart Set. When I was looking at reference images, I did see some arguments about whether or not these tanks that served in the desert were painted a sandy colour, or just left in the grey-green that they would have been painted prior to shipping to Africa. I thought the sand colour would be a bit more interesting, and it's something I almost never do, so that's what I've done. This paint is really nice for spraying through an airbrush, and as is usually the case, a couple of thin coats is the way to go. I follow this with a light highlight, mostly from above. This is a mix of the base colour I can't pronounce, and Model Air white, roughly 3 parts of the sand colour to 1 part white. I do usually lighten colours with a buff colour, but in this case the base is already pretty close to that, so white is the ideal choice here. Now for some more highlighting, this time with a brush. Specifically a contouring brush that you would use on your face if you're inclined to wear makeup. I'm not, so I use mine to paint models. The colours here are, again, the base colour with Model Air white. There's just a little bit more white this time. I'm mostly trying to hit the sharp edges and raise details and stuff like that, bits where it makes sense for there to be wear and where the light might shine a bit brighter, just to, well, highlight things, really. I seal that in with a nice coat of gloss varnish, because now it's time to apply decals. Because this tank was captured by Australians, it's got lots of kangaroo markings all around it. I'm using the set that came with the kit, and these markings are conveniently labelled for where they should go. Those labels were a bit of a hindrance though when cutting the decals out. Some of them are really close to the actual markings, and they are decals too, so they will go onto the model and make a little black mess you don't want. Most of the kangaroos go onto surfaces that have detail, so in order to help the decals settle around those details, I'm using Mark Fit Strong. And I use a brush with short stiff bristles to press down on the decal and help it conform. I wasn't totally sure if the original Italian markings should be added as well, but I decided against it. Partially because it meant having to apply fewer decals, but also none of the reference images I saw showed any Italian markings. I assume they would have all just been painted over. With the decals in place, you could seal them in with another coat of gloss varnish, but I've chosen not to do so. Unless you're going to be doing something rough over them, I've never really found a need to add another layer of gloss. So, onto the chipping. I'm using ammo by Mig chipping colour here, and if you've seen my painting videos, you've probably seen me do this chipping method many times. It's just a piece of spongy foam, in this case specific artist's sponge, but any foamy, spongy stuff like this should work. Remove most of the paint from the sponge and dab it onto the model in an up and down motion, just like how you would dab on the haters.
What are you on about, Herbert?
Just cool kid stuff. You wouldn't understand. Because the sponge can't really reach all of the areas of the model, I add some more little chips and scratches using the same colour and a fine brush. The thing to pay attention to here is how thin you're painting the scratches. Don't do them too thick, otherwise they just look like paint strokes. I did, of course, try not to go overboard with this, but I think I did. Still, I think it looks pretty decent. It's just a little bit more beaten up than I'd initially planned. Now, I move on to the tracks. I painted these with Vallejo Model Colour Basalt Grey. Lately I've been painting tracks with a rusty colour, but I wanted to see how this might work because why not? I just apply this to the tracks, obviously, while trying to avoid things that aren't tracks. Of course, a bigger brush for the bigger areas and a smaller one to get into all of the little bits around the wheels and such is a good idea. The colour is a lot lighter than I would really like the tracks to be, but the track wash I've been using lately is fairly dark, so that should take care of it. Once that was done, I decided I would try something else that I don't normally do. I used scale 75 black metal and painted I don't know what you would call these, the bit of the tread that sticks down and touches the ground and gets worn. Whatever they are, I painted them with black metal. I figure having this under the wash, which will come later, might have an interesting result. I guess we'll see how it works a bit later. I used the same colour to paint the outer part of the idler wheel. I figure this would be worn from constantly rolling over the tracks, and at the very least it wouldn't be the same colour as the rest of the wheel. Then, still using the same colour, I paint the metal parts of the tools. The most obvious one being the diggy part of the shovel, which looks to me like it extends a little bit past the bracket, so I've done a bit on that side in metal as well. There's a hammer there, and on the other side there's a something, and I think that entire tool, whatever it is, should be metal, so I've painted it metal. This is pretty simple to do, you've just got to be careful not to paint the mounting bracket and any other bits that shouldn't be metal. Seems pretty obvious, but you never know. Also, while I didn't do a very good job of filming it, I painted the turret top machine gun with black metal too. How about a different colour now, just for a change? I used ammo by Mig rusty tracks and painted the mufflers. This is obviously a pretty good colour for anything rusty. To try and add a bit of interest, I used Vallejo Model colour light orange and just sort of stippled it onto the mufflers, obviously again being careful to avoid the body. This is going to be covered and probably obscured by rust washes later on, but it can't hurt to try and add some interest to the base colour either, so why not? Next, I use ammo by Mig rubber and tyres to paint the bits that are rubber, and also tyres. In particular, the tyres of the road wheels and the spare wheel on the back of the hull. As with the tracks, I use a larger brush to paint the larger areas, and a smaller brush for the smaller areas. Using a brush appropriately sized for what you're doing? What a concept! This colour is pretty close to what I used on the tracks, but it is different, and this probably won't be covered with a wash, so when it's done, it should stand out from the tracks. Back to the tools. It's probably not a bad idea to paint the tool handles in a woody colour, and I've used model colour cork brown here because it's kind of a woody colour. It does look quite close to the base colour, but that's okay. It is different enough to see, and the washes are going to change the way it looks a bit later anyway. And by later, I mean right now. First up, undiluted army painter dark tone, which I apply to all the parts I painted with the black metal, like the machine gun and the tools. Though I did forget about the idler wheel, but I don't think that really matters too much, and I wasn't going to put this on the things on the tracks where I put the black metal anyway. I also thought this would look good in the grills on the engine deck, just to give them a bit more depth, and around the gun mount on the front of the hull, to add some more depth and interest there. Next, I apply Army Painter Strong Tone to the wooden tool handles. It's actually a bit darker than I'd initially wanted, but I thought it looked good, so that's how I've kept it. Then I thought, why not apply a coat of Army Painter Light Tone all over the model? This was diluted roughly 3 parts light tone to 1 part water. My intention was to create a sort of dirty look and add a bit of variation to the base colour, especially over the decals, which were way too white and clean looking. I knew this would work decently, but once it was dry, I was actually kind of amazed by what a difference it made. The trick to this, though it's not really a trick, is to not let the wash pool up anywhere, except in the edges and gaps and things like that. Don't let it pool up on flat surfaces, otherwise you get weird looking tide marks. I sat with that for a while, umming and ahhing over whether or not I liked it how it was, or if I needed to do anything else. I did paint the top of the jack on the rear of the hull with model colour Basalt Grey, though I didn't film it. After that, I decided everything was fine, so I applied a coat of gloss varnish to protect the acrylics from the impending enamels. First, Mig Productions track wash, on the tracks.
So rebellious!
This is obviously pretty simple to apply. Big brush on big areas, small brush on smaller areas, and as with all of the enamels, you can apply and remove this with clean thinner as much as you want until you get what you want. This colour makes the tracks look a lot darker, which I think looks good. I did consider adding some rust effects to it just for some very subtle rust, but at the moment I clearly haven't done that. The metal colour I put onto the treads is quite subtle, and maybe it wasn't really worth doing. It was of course worth trying though, because why not experiment with things? It might work a bit better with a rusty base colour, and in future I think I will continue basing my tracks with a rusty colour. This doesn't look bad, and I like it, so I move on to some Mig Productions light rust effects, which I add to the exhaust. It's not quite what I was looking for, which I kind of expected, so I was ready with the Mig standard rust effects, which I added before the light rust really had a chance to dry. It sort of blends the two colours for what I feel is a bit more of a satisfying rusty colour. Next, I use some Mig Productions wash for desert sand base, which I've never used before, or at least I don't think I've used it before. Remembering is hard. I think the idea with this is that you are supposed to just wash the entire vehicle with it. However, I've chosen to apply it around gaps and detaily bits and in corners and things like that. It is okay to be a little messy with this though, because you can always just take a brush with clean or relatively clean thinner on it and wipe away what you've put on. You can do this as much as you want. Such is the glory of working with enamels. When I'm removing this, you might be able to see that I'm trying to do so in ways that make sense, like with downward strokes on the more vertical surfaces. I'm trying to do it in the direction that rainwater would run off the tank. I know it's a desert tank, but still I would assume there's a bit of rain. Anyway, I'm not really doing a specific streaking effect, but there are some places you'll be able to see at least the direction of the brush strokes, and at least to me, it doesn't really make sense for them to be going horizontally on vertical surfaces. This was a fairly time-consuming step, but in the end, I think it's looking pretty good. So I and ah over whether I need to do more enamels, which would require another layer of gloss varnish, so the existing enamels don't get reactivated and removed. And like I said before, I did consider adding some slight rust effects to the tracks, and maybe later I will, because it is okay to go back and make changes to your models, even if you've previously decided that they're finished. But I'm pretty happy with what I've got. Also, it was getting close to ANZAC Day, which I figured would be an appropriate day to put this video up. So I apply some Ammo Lucky Matte Varnish, and then, as a finishing touch, I figured maybe I shouldn't just ignore the headlamps. So I painted those, or coloured them in, with a Mimetico pen, liquid chrome. It is quite shiny, maybe a little bit more shiny than the headlamps are really meant to be, and I'm pretty sure there should be a rim around the headlamps, which isn't modelled but should probably be there, but this looks okay, so I'm happy with it. At this point, the Warlord 28mm scale M1340, as captured by Australians, is now completed, and I'm pretty happy with the result here. I don't think I've ever painted a tank or any other vehicle in just a plain sandy colour before, and I guess a single colour paint scheme isn't really a challenge or anything, but it is still nice to do something different that you don't normally do. I quite like the way that one colour has ended up looking. Of course it's not really one colour, it's been highlighted and had a couple of washes over it, and obviously those things have impacted the colours and made it better, but they probably wouldn't help over a colour that just didn't look good to begin with. Is it the exact perfect shade that Italian tanks were definitely painted in? How would I know? I just think it looks good. Ammo by Mig seem to think it's the right shade, and I don't have the energy or interest in nitpicking minuscule differences in shades of paint. So, as usual, I've just picked something that looks good to me and gone with it. I think this is going to look really good on the gaming table.
We all know that you're never going to put this on a gaming table, Herbert.
Yeah, probably not, but it would look good, especially if you've got an Australian desert force, which I don't. But I don't have an Italian force either. Not yet anyway. But there's absolutely nothing saying that you can't paint a wargaming model for a force you don't have, and you can use it as an excuse to buy more models to go with it. So I guess I don't really have a lot to say about this, nothing that you haven't already seen in the video. I've not done any new or outrageous techniques or anything like that, it's just a fairly straightforward paint job. And there are, as always, things I do and don't like about it, and areas I've identified that I could do better next time. But I think the important thing is, I enjoyed the process, and I got it to a point I was satisfied enough with to call it done, and roughly close enough to the deadline I'd set for myself in order to get this video done before ANZAC Day. If you're interested in the colours I've used in this video, there's a list of them in the description below. If you're painting one of these, or anything really, I would encourage you to use the colours you like and think are most appropriate, rather than just following somebody else's list. And if you do paint one of these, maybe you would like to show us some pictures over on our Discord community. That would be cool. We would also like to see anything else you've painted. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. And if you've not already done so, why not subscribe here on YouTube? It costs absolutely nothing, which saves you, well, nothing really, but it's free, so why not? Or, if you've got the means and you want to help a Erpaderp do Erpaderp things and see my videos a bit early, consider becoming a patron. You can find links to Patreon and all of my other things like Discord and social media in the description below. And, as always, I shall return soon. So until then, be excellent to each other, have an amazing day, and thanks for watching. Farewell.